I knew something was wrong the moment I pulled onto my property and saw 3 cars crammed into my driveway like sardines in a can. My driveway, the one I owned, maintained, and paid taxes on. I'm Derek Thompson, and I've lived at 4782 Meadowbrook Lane in Scottsdale, Arizona for the past 8 years. When I bought this place, it came with an easement agreement that allowed my neighbor, old Mr. Henderson, to use a shared portion of my driveway to access his garage. It was a simple arrangement that had worked perfectly fine for nearly a decade. Mr. Henderson was a retired accountant who drove a sensible sedan and never caused any problems. That all changed 6 months ago when he moved to Florida to be closer to his grandkids, and the house was purchased by the Pinewood Heights Homeowners Association. They converted his property into a community center. At first, I didn't mind. The easement was still technically valid, and I figured they'd use it the same way Mr. Henderson had, maybe for staff parking or the occasional vehicle needing access to the back of their building. I was wrong. Dead wrong. The first week after the community center opened, I came home from work to find 2 cars parked in the easement portion. Annoying, but not catastrophic. I could still get to my garage. The second week, there were 4 cars. By the third week, people were parking all the way up my driveway, blocking my garage completely. I had to park on the street and carry groceries 100 feet to my front door. That's when I decided to pay the HOA office a visit. The community center was a renovated ranch-style house painted an aggressive shade of beige. Inside, the walls were covered with notices about lawn care violations, approved paint colors, and upcoming meetings. Behind a desk sat a woman who looked like she'd been preserved in hairspray and indignation. Her nameplate read, Brenda Morrison, HOA President. "Can I help you?" she asked without looking up from her computer. "I'm Derek Thompson. I live next door at 4782. We need to talk about the parking situation." That got her attention. She swiveled in her chair, and I got my first good look at her. Late 40s, blonde highlights that screamed, "I want to speak to the manager," and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, you must be the property owner with the easement. How wonderful to finally meet you. Isn't it nice that we're able to make use of that space?" "Make use of it? Your members are blocking my entire driveway. I couldn't get into my garage last night." Brenda's smile tightened. "Well, the easement agreement gives us legal right to use that portion of the driveway. We've reviewed the documents thoroughly. The easement allows access, not parking. It was meant for one vehicle to pass through, not as overflow parking for your events." "I'm afraid I disagree with your interpretation," she said, clicking her pen in a way that made me want to grab it and throw it across the room. "The document says we have right of way. That includes the right to park." "No, it absolutely does not. Right of way means the right to pass through. This is becoming a nuisance." Brenda stood up, smoothing down her blazer. "Mr. Thompson, I think you'll find that being a good neighbor means making small sacrifices for the community. We provide valuable services to this neighborhood, and we need adequate parking for our members and events. Perhaps if you weren't so focused on your own convenience, you'd see the bigger picture." My jaw clenched. "The bigger picture is that I own that property, and you're abusing an easement that was granted in good faith. I'm asking nicely for you to stop using my driveway as a parking lot. And I'm telling you that we have every legal right to use it as we see fit within the bounds of the easement. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have actual HOA business to attend to." I left that office knowing I'd have to lawyer up. This wasn't going to be resolved with a polite conversation. Over the next 2 weeks, the parking got worse. They started hosting evening yoga classes, book clubs, and something called Wine and Wine Wednesdays, where members came to complain about their neighbors. My driveway became the unofficial overflow lot. I documented everything with photos and timestamps. On February 14th, Valentine's Day of all days, I came home to find 7 cars parked bumper to bumper up my driveway. 7. I had to park 3 blocks away and walk home in the Arizona heat. I called a real estate attorney named Patricia Chen the next morning. She had good reviews and specialized in property disputes. Her office was in downtown Scottsdale, a sleek glass building that cost more per square foot than my house. "Tell me about this easement," Patricia said after I'd explained the situation. I pulled out the paperwork I'd dug up from my files. It was established in 1987 when the original houses were built. The The language says the neighboring property has right of access and egress through the eastern portion of the driveway, not to exceed 12 feet in width. That's it. Nothing about parking. Patricia adjusted her glasses and read through the document carefully. This is actually pretty straightforward. An easement for access doesn't include the right to park unless explicitly stated. They're exceeding the scope of the easement. You have grounds to restrict their use. Can I revoke it entirely? Possibly. Easements can be terminated for several reasons: excessive use beyond the scope, abandonment, or if the purpose of the easement becomes impossible to accomplish. In this case, they're not using it for its intended purpose at all. They're using it as a parking facility. So what's my move? Patricia leaned back in her chair. First, we send them a formal letter explaining that they're violating the terms of the easement and demanding they cease using your property for parking. We give them 30 days to comply. If they don't, we file for termination of the easement based on misuse. Given that they're not even using it for access anymore, but rather for storage of vehicles, we have a strong case. How much is this going to cost me? Initial letter and consultation, $1,500. If we go to court, probably another $5,000 to $10,000 depending on how hard they fight. I thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. Do it. The letter went out on February 20th. Patricia's firm sent it certified mail, return receipt requested. Brenda signed for it on February 22nd. I know because I checked the tracking obsessively. The letter was crystal clear. Cease parking on my property within 30 days or face legal action seeking termination of the easement and damages for trespass. For 2 glorious days, my driveway was empty. I actually got to park in my own garage. I should have known it wouldn't last. On February 25th, I came home to find not only cars parked in my driveway, but an actual notice taped to my garage door. It was printed on official HOA letterhead and signed by Brenda. Violation notice: the property at 4782 Meadowbrook Lane is in violation of HOA covenants regarding neighborly cooperation and community standards. Failure to allow proper use of the shared driveway easement may result in fines of $100 per day and potential legal action. You have 72 hours to comply. I stood there reading this nonsense 3 times, convinced I was hallucinating. My property wasn't even part of their HOA. I'd checked when I bought the place. The subdivision had been built in phases, and my house was part of Phase 1, which predated the HOA formation in 1995. I was grandfathered out. I took a picture of the notice and texted it to Patricia. She called me back within 20 minutes. "They're insane," she said without preamble. "You're not in their HOA. They have zero authority over you. This is harassment." "Can they actually fine me?" "No, they can try, but those fines are worthless. They're completely unenforceable." "Send me that notice. We're adding harassment to our complaint." That evening, I walked over to the community center. It was 6:30, and they were hosting some kind of gardening seminar. Cars lined my driveway again. Inside, I found Brenda holding court in front of 20 women of varying ages, all hanging on her every word about drought-resistant landscaping. "I need to speak with you," I said from the doorway. Brenda's expression could have curdled milk. "We're in the middle of a presentation." "This will just take a minute." She excused herself with a martyred sigh and followed me into the hallway. "What is it now, Mr. Thompson?" I held up my phone, showing the violation notice. "This. You can't fine me. I'm not part of your HOA. Every property in Pinewood Heights is subject to our covenants." "No, they're not. Phase 1 was built before the HOA existed. I'm exempt." Brenda's face flushed. "That's ridiculous. Everyone pays dues." "I don't. I've never paid dues. Check your records." "Well, that's obviously an oversight that needs to be corrected. I'll have our attorney look into it." "You do that. In the meantime, get your members' cars out of my driveway." "The easement is being misused, which my attorney has already explained in writing. You have 25 days left to comply with our demand. I suggest you take it seriously." Brenda crossed her arms. "I think you'll find that we have more resources than you do, Mr. Thompson. The HOA has an annual budget of over $200,000. We can fight this for years if necessary. Can you?" "I guess we'll find out." Over the next 3 weeks, things escalated. Brenda apparently took my challenge personally. Not only did the parking continue, but now there were cars parked on my property outside the easement area. They were trespassing on portions of my driveway that weren't even covered by the agreement. I started having vehicles towed. The first one belonged to a woman named Susan who showed up screaming at me while the tow truck hauled away her Lexus SUV. "You can't tow me! Brenda said we could park here." "Brenda doesn't own my property. You're trespassing." "This is outrageous. I'll sue you." "Get in line." I towed 4 cars that week. Each time, the owner would storm over to my house, hurling threats and accusations. I calmly explained each time that they were parked on my private property without permission and should take up their complaint with Brenda. The towing company loved me. At $175 per tow, plus storage fees, I was their new favorite customer. Of course, I wasn't seeing any of that money, but the satisfaction was worth it. On a March 15th, I received a thick envelope from something called Community Legal Associates. Inside was a lawsuit. The Pinewood Heights HOA was suing me for interference with easement rights, harassment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. They were seeking $50,000 in damages and a court order preventing me from interfering with their use of the easement. I forwarded everything to Patricia. We met the next day. "They're throwing everything at the wall, hoping something sticks," she explained. "The emotional distress claim is laughable. Interference with easement rights is their only real argument, and it's weak because they're the ones exceeding the easement scope. We'll file a counterclaim for trespass, termination of easement, and our own harassment claim based on that ridiculous violation notice." "How long is this going to take?" "Cases like this usually take 6 to 12 months if they go to trial, but I suspect they'll settle once they realize they're not going to win." I wasn't so sure. Brenda struck me as the type who'd rather die than admit she was wrong. The legal papers flew back and forth like artillery fire. Patricia filed our counterclaim along with a motion for a preliminary injunction, stopping them from parking on my property pending trial. The HOA opposed it with a 50-page brief, arguing that I was being unreasonable and that their use fell within the easement. We had a hearing scheduled for April 10th. Meanwhile, life at 4782 Meadowbrook Lane became increasingly uncomfortable. Brenda mobilized her HOA members against me. Suddenly, I was getting dirty looks at the grocery store. Someone left a nasty note on my windshield calling me a selfish jerk. My mailbox was knocked over twice. I couldn't prove the HOA was behind the vandalism, but the timing was suspicious. The worst incident happened on March 28th. I woke up at 2 in the morning to the sound of breaking glass. Someone had thrown a rock through my front window. The rock had a note tied to it. "Good neighbors share." I called the police. They took a report but said without witnesses or camera footage, there wasn't much they could do. I installed security cameras the next day. The hearing arrived. We met at the Maricopa County Superior Court downtown. Patricia looked confident in a sharp navy suit. I wore the one suit I owned that didn't make me look like I was going to prom. The HOA showed up with their attorney, a slick guy named Martin Price, who looked like he charged $500 an hour. Judge Raymond Walsh presided. He was in his 60s with gray hair and a no-nonsense demeanor that suggested he'd seen every trick in the book. "This is a hearing on plaintiff Derek Thompson's motion for preliminary injunction," Judge Walsh said. "Counsel, keep it brief." Patricia stood. "Your Honor, this case is straightforward. The easement at issue grants right of access, not parking. The defendant, HOA, has converted my client's driveway into a parking lot, blocking his garage and preventing him from using his own property. We have photos documenting up to 7 vehicles parked on the easement at once. This exceeds the scope, constitutes trespass, and warrants immediate injunctive relief." Martin Price rose. "Your Honor, the Pinewood Heights HOA relies on this easement for legitimate community purposes. The language of the easement is broad enough to encompass parking. My client operates a community center that serves over 300 families. Limiting parking would severely impact these valuable services." Judge Walsh looked at the easement document. "Mr. Price, where exactly does it say parking is permitted? The phrase right of access and egress is broad language that means the right to pass through. I don't see anything about parking. Courts have interpreted access easements to include incidental parking necessary to effectuate the purpose of the easement." Incidental parking for a single homeowner accessing their garage is quite different from parking for community center events, don't you think? Price shifted uncomfortably. The community center replaced a residential use. The easement should evolve with the property's use. That's not how easements work, counsel. They're interpreted according to their original scope and purpose. Show me case law saying an access easement automatically expands to accommodate commercial parking lots. Your Honor, it's not a commercial parking lot. It's a community amenity. Judge Walsh turned to Patricia. Ms. Chen, is your client seeking complete termination of the easement? We've pleaded that in our counterclaim, Your Honor, based on material misuse. But for purposes of the injunction, we're simply asking that the defendant be enjoined from parking on the easement. They can still use it for actual access if needed. That seems reasonable. Mr. Price, what legitimate access purpose does your client currently use this easement for? Price consulted with Brenda, who was sitting behind him looking furious. The community center needs vehicle access for deliveries and maintenance. How often? That varies. Give me an estimate. Perhaps once or twice a week. Judge Walsh made a note. So the other 5 days a week, you're just parking on it. Your Honor, the community needs... I've heard enough. The motion for preliminary injunction is granted. The defendant, Pinewood Heights HOA, is enjoined from parking any vehicles on the easement portion of plaintiff's driveway pending final resolution of this case. The easement may only be used for actual access purposes, meaning vehicles may pass through but not park or remain stationary for more than 15 minutes. Violation of this order will result in contempt sanctions. We'll set a trial date for the underlying claims. Brenda looked like she wanted to explode. Martin Price tried to argue, but Judge Walsh shut him down. We got our injunction. I'd won round one. Outside the courtroom, Patricia was pleased. That went better than expected. Walsh clearly thinks they're abusing the easement. What happens now? They can't park there anymore. If they do, we file for contempt and they'll face fines or even jail time for the board members. My guess is they'll try to settle before trial. And if they don't? Then we go to trial and get the easement terminated permanently. I drove home feeling lighter than I had in months. The injunction was clear. No more parking. I could finally use my own driveway again. That lasted exactly 2 days. On April 12th, I came home to find 3 cars parked in my driveway, not in the easement area, on my property, completely outside any arguable right they might have. I checked my security cameras and saw Brenda herself directing people where to park. She'd even put up temporary signs saying, Community Center Overflow Parking, with arrows pointing up my driveway. I called Patricia immediately. They're violating the injunction. Document everything and send me the footage. We'll file for contempt in the morning. I also called the police non-emergency line. An officer named Rodriguez showed up an hour later. I showed him the court order and the security footage. So they're not allowed to park here at all? He asked. Not according to the judge. And these cars aren't even in the easement area. They're on my property with no legal basis whatsoever. Do you want them towed? Absolutely. Officer Rodriguez called for tow trucks. 3 of them showed up over the next hour and hauled away the vehicles. I recorded everything. As the last car was being loaded, Brenda came storming out of the community center. What do you think you're doing? She shrieked. Enforcing a court order, I said calmly. Those are our members' cars. They're parked illegally on my property in violation of a court order. I've had them towed. You can't do this. Officer Rodriguez stepped forward. Madam, he can. This is private property, and there's a court order prohibiting your organization from parking here. Brenda's face turned an alarming shade of red. This is harassment. I'll have your badge for this. You're welcome to file a complaint, madam, but right now, I suggest you inform your members not to park on this property. After the officer left, Brenda turned her fury on me. You're going to regret this. I will make your life miserable. You already tried that. How'd it work out? She jabbed a finger at my chest, coming close enough that I could smell her perfume. I have friends on the city council. I have connections you can't imagine. By the time I'm done with you, you'll wish you'd never moved to this neighborhood. Are you threatening me? I'm promising you. I held up my phone. Good. Because I'm recording this. Keep going if you want your threats presented to the judge. Brenda's eyes widened. She spun on her heel and marched back to the community center without another word. Patricia filed the contempt motion on April 13th. The hearing was set for April 25th. In the meantime, the HOA finally got the message. The parking stopped. My driveway remained blissfully empty. I started to think maybe this nightmare was ending. Then I got home on April 18th to find a survey crew on my property. 2 guys with equipment were measuring and marking things with little flags. I walked over to them. "What's going on?" The older of the two, a weathered guy in a sun hat, checked his clipboard. "We're surveying the property line for the Pinewood Heights HOA. "Why?" "They're claiming the property line is different than recorded. They hired us to do an official survey." My stomach dropped. Different how? They think their property extends further east, which would mean the easement area is actually on their land, not yours. This was insane. The property lines had been established for decades. I had a survey from when I bought the house. "Do you have documentation of this claim?" "Just what the HOA provided. We're doing an independent survey to settle it." "Who's paying for this?" "The HOA." Of course they were. This was Brenda's latest tactic. If she couldn't use my driveway, she'd claim it wasn't my driveway at all. I called Patricia for what felt like the 100th time. "They're trying to say the property line is wrong." "That's a desperate move. Property lines are well established and recorded with the county. Do you have your survey?" "Yeah, from 2018 when I bought the place." "Send it to me. If they're seriously challenging property lines, they'll need to file a quiet title action. That's a separate lawsuit and a very high bar to clear. They'd need compelling evidence that the recorded boundary is wrong." "Could they win?" "Extremely unlikely, but it'll drag things out and cost more money, which is probably their goal. They're trying to bleed you dry." The survey was completed 3 days later. The results showed exactly what my 2018 survey had shown. The property line was where it had always been. The easement was on my property. Brenda's gambit had failed. The contempt hearing on April 25th was swift and brutal for the HOA. Patricia presented the security footage of Brenda directing people to park on my property 2 days after the injunction was issued. She also presented the footage of Brenda threatening me. Judge Walsh was not amused. "Mrs. Morrison, you were in this courtroom when I issued the injunction. You understood it, yet you willfully violated it. Why?" Brenda stood, smoothing her blazer. "Your Honor, we had a community event and nowhere else for people to park. It was temporary, and you didn't think the court order applied to you." "That's not what I meant. We were trying to accommodate our members." "By breaking the law. The injunction was clear. You had your attorney explain it to you, yet you chose to ignore it." Judge Walsh consulted his notes. "I'm finding the Pinewood Heights HOA in contempt of court. You're fined $5,000, payable to the court within 30 days. If there are any further violations, the fine will be $20,000, and I'll consider incarceration for board members. Am I making myself clear?" "Yes, Your Honor," Martin Price said quickly, probably sensing Brenda was about to argue. "Good. Trial is set for June 15th. Don't make me regret not jailing someone today." We left the courthouse victorious again. $5,000 wasn't enough to bankrupt the HOA, but it sent a message. Judge Walsh was on my side. "They're going to settle," Patricia said. "Price isn't stupid. He knows they're going to lose at trial." "Brenda won't settle. She's too stubborn." "She might not have a choice. Price will advise the board that continuing is throwing good money after bad." Patricia was half right. Price did advise settlement. The HOA board, which consisted of Brenda and 4 other members, voted 3-2 to reject it. Brenda and her closest ally, a woman named Deborah Kent, refused to give up. The trial was happening. May was relatively quiet. The parking stayed away from my property. I actually got to enjoy my house for the first time in months, but I knew the peace wouldn't last. Brenda was plotting something. I could feel it. On May 20th, I got my answer. The City Code Enforcement Office sent me a notice. My property was in violation of municipal code for having an unauthorized chain barrier across my driveway. Except I didn't have a chain across my driveway. I hadn't installed anything. I called the code enforcement officer listed on the notice, a man named Phil Crawford. "I received a notice about a chain barrier, but there isn't one." "Are you at 4782 Meadowbrook Lane?" "Yes." "We have photos showing a chain across the driveway." "That's impossible. I haven't installed a chain. Can you meet me at the property? I need to inspect it. Phil showed up 30 minutes later. We walked around my property together. No chain. We checked the entire driveway, the easement area, everywhere. Nothing. This doesn't make sense, Phil muttered. The complaint included photos. Can I see them? He pulled out his tablet and showed me. Sure enough, there were photos of a chain stretched across a driveway. But as I looked closer, I realized it wasn't my driveway. The angle was wrong. The background showed different trees. That's not my property. Phil zoomed in on the photo metadata. The complaint says it was taken on May 18th at 4782 Meadowbrook Lane. Look at the background. Those aren't my trees. Someone faked this. Phil's expression darkened. Who filed the complaint? He checked his records. It was submitted anonymously online. I'll bet anything it was the HOA next door. We're in litigation. They're harassing me. If someone filed a false complaint, that's a violation. Do you have proof this isn't your property in the photo? I took him around to different angles, showing how nothing matched. The more we looked, the clearer it became. The photo was from somewhere else entirely. Someone had taken a picture of a random driveway with a chain and claimed it was mine. I'll close this complaint as unfounded, Phil said, and I'll flag the account that submitted it. If this happens again, we can pursue charges for filing false reports. Thank you. After he left, I sat on my porch thinking. Brenda was getting more desperate and more reckless. The false code complaint was borderline criminal. She was spiraling, and that made her dangerous. I decided to take action. If we were going to trial anyway, I might as well prepare for the endgame. I'd been thinking about it since the injunction hearing. The easement was being misused. I had grounds to terminate it. But even if I won at trial, what would stop them from finding other ways to harass me? I needed leverage. On May 23rd, I contacted a contractor about installing a gate system at the edge of my property where the easement began. If I was going to revoke the easement entirely, I wanted the ability to physically control access. The contractor, a straightforward guy named Mike, came out to assess the property. You want a chain barrier? He asked. Eventually, if the court terminates the easement. For now, I just want to know what's possible. I can install posts on either side of the driveway with a chain setup. Lockable, removable if needed. Takes a day to install, maybe $1,500. Hold off for now. I want to see how the trial goes first. No problem. Call me when you're ready. The trial date approached. Patricia was confident. We had the easement language, photos of the excessive parking, testimony from me about being blocked from my garage, the judge's prior rulings, everything. The HOA had nothing but Brenda's insistence that they were entitled to use my property however they wanted. On June 10th, 5 days before trial, Martin Price called Patricia with a settlement offer. The HOA would pay me $10,000, acknowledge they'd exceeded the easement scope, and agree to use it only for access purposes going forward. They wanted the case dismissed with prejudice. What do you think? Patricia asked me. What happens to the easement? It stays in place but with strict limitations. They can only use it for actual vehicle access, no parking, maximum 15-minute stops. If they violate, you can seek enforcement through the courts. So I'd still have to deal with them forever. Essentially, yes. No deal. I want the easement terminated. I don't trust them to follow any agreement. That's risky. If we go to trial and lose, you get nothing and you're out legal fees. What are the odds of losing? Patricia thought about it. Maybe 20%. Judge Walsh clearly thinks they're abusing it, but trials are unpredictable. I'll take those odds. We rejected the settlement. Brenda apparently lost her mind when she heard. According to Martin Price, she ranted for 20 minutes about my stubbornness and vowed to fight to the bitter end. The trial was on. June 15th arrived hot and clear, typical Arizona summer weather. The courthouse air conditioning was a blessing. We arrived early. Judge Walsh's courtroom was smaller than I expected, wood-paneled and formal. Patricia and I sat at the plaintiff's table. Across the aisle, Martin Price set up his files while Brenda sat rigidly beside him, radiating hostility. All rise. Judge Walsh entered, and we got started. Since I was the plaintiff in the counterclaim seeking termination, we went first. Patricia called me to the stand. Mr. Thompson, Please tell the court about your property and the easement. I explained how I'd bought the house in 2018, the existing easement, how it had worked fine with Mr. Henderson, and how everything changed when the HOA took over. When did the problem start? Almost immediately. Within weeks of the community center opening, they were parking multiple cars in my driveway. At first, just a couple, but it escalated quickly. How many vehicles have you observed at once? 7 was the maximum. Bumper to bumper, completely blocking my garage. Patricia displayed the photos I'd taken. Cars crammed into my driveway, dates and times stamped. What impact did this have on you? I couldn't use my own garage. I had to park blocks away. I'd come home after work and have nowhere to put my car. It was frustrating and frankly infuriating. Did you attempt to resolve this amicably? Yes, I spoke with Mrs. Morrison multiple times. She insisted they had the right to park there and refused to stop. Patricia walked me through the whole saga. The meetings, the violation notice they'd tried to issue, the continued parking after the injunction, all of it. On cross-examination, Martin Price tried to make me look unreasonable. Mr. Thompson, isn't it true that you've towed vehicles belonging to elderly community members? I towed vehicles illegally parked on my property, yes. I don't check the age of the owners. You don't think it's harsh to tow a 75-year-old woman's car? I think it's harsh for her to park on my property without permission. If she's old enough to drive, she's old enough to park legally. You seem very focused on your rights with little concern for your neighbors. My neighbors are welcome to use public streets for parking. They're not welcome to use my driveway. Price tried to paint me as selfish and unreasonable, but it didn't stick. I was just defending my property rights, which is exactly what the law allowed. Patricia called a surveyor as an expert witness to confirm the property boundaries and explain that the easement area was definitely my property. Then she rested our case. The HOA's case was weaker. Price called Brenda to the stand. She wore her most professional outfit and her most pained expression, like she was the real victim here. Mrs. Morrison, can you explain the community center's parking needs? We serve over 300 families in this neighborhood. We host events, classes, social gatherings. These are valuable services that bring the community together. Unfortunately, our parking is limited, and we've had to use the easement for overflow. Why is that necessary? The community center only has 15 parking spaces. When we have events with 50 or 60 attendees, we need additional space. And Mr. Thompson has been unwilling to accommodate this? Completely unwilling. He's refused every attempt at compromise. He seems to take pleasure in making things difficult for the community. Patricia objected. Speculation and argumentative. Sustained. Price tried to establish that the easement language was ambiguous enough to include parking, but it was a tough sell. The document was pretty clear. He also tried to argue that I wasn't really harmed because I could park on the street. Patricia's cross-examination was surgical. Mrs. Morrison, how many times per week does a vehicle actually need to pass through the easement for access purposes? I'm not sure I understand. The easement is for access. How often do you actually need to access the back of your property? Well, that varies. Give me an average. Brenda shifted uncomfortably. Perhaps twice a week for deliveries or maintenance. So twice a week you need actual access. What about the other times? The times when you're parking 7 cars there? Those are community members attending our programs. Right, they're parking, not accessing anything, just parking. The parking facilitates their access to the community center. The community center is on your property. They can access it from your parking lot. They don't need to go through the easement at all, do they? It's more convenient. Convenience isn't what easements are for, is it? I suppose not. In fact, you've converted Mr. Thompson's driveway into a free parking lot for your organization, haven't you? That's not how I'd characterize it. How would you characterize 7 cars parked bumper to bumper on someone else's property? We're using the easement we have a legal right to use. Patricia pulled out the injunction order. Judge Walsh disagreed. He issued an order prohibiting you from parking there, and you violated that order, didn't you? Brenda's jaw tightened. There was a miscommunication about you violated a court order, yes or no. The circumstances were yes or no, Mrs. Morrison. Yes. And you were found in contempt and fined $5,000, correct? Yes. No further questions. Price called a few community center members to testify about how wonderful the programs were and how much they'd be harmed by limited parking. Patricia objected on relevance grounds, and Judge Walsh sustained most of them. The community's feelings about the center weren't relevant to whether the easement was being misused. After 2 days of testimony, we gave closing arguments. Patricia hammered the point that access didn't mean parking, that the HOA had exceeded the scope, and that termination was the only appropriate remedy given their continued violations. Price argued that termination was too harsh, that the easement should be preserved with limitations, and that I was being unreasonable. Judge Walsh took the case under advisement and said he'd issue a written ruling within 2 weeks. The waiting was torture. Every day felt like a week. I tried to focus on work, on normal life, but I kept checking my email obsessively for word from Patricia. The ruling came on June 29th. Patricia called me at work. We won. Everything. Everything. Judge Walsh terminated the easement. He found that the HOA materially exceeded the scope, that the violation was willful and ongoing, and that termination was the appropriate remedy. The easement is gone. They have no rights to your property anymore. I sat down hard in my desk chair. We actually won. You won. The order is effective immediately. I'm emailing you a copy now. I read Judge Walsh's ruling 3 times. It was beautifully written, methodical, and clear. He laid out the law on easements, analyzed the specific language of this one, documented the HOA's abuses, and concluded that they'd forfeited any right to the easement through their own actions. He even cited their contempt violation as evidence of bad faith. That afternoon, I called Mike the contractor. I'm ready to install that chain system. When do you want me to start? Tomorrow. Mike and his crew showed up the next morning. They installed sturdy steel posts on either side of my driveway at the property line, cemented deep into the ground. Between them, they rigged a heavy-duty chain with a padlock. When it was up, the chain blocked vehicle access completely. It was removable if I ever needed to take it down, but otherwise, it was a solid barrier. I stood back and admired their work, my property, my driveway, finally secure. Brenda noticed by that afternoon. I was watering my front lawn when she came stomping over, her face purple with rage. "What is that?" she demanded, pointing at the chain. "A chain? You can't block the easement." "There is no easement. Judge Walsh terminated it. Would you like to see the court order?" "That's not final. We're appealing." "Appeal all you want. The order is effective immediately. This is my property, and I'm securing it." "You're insane. You've ruined everything." "I've protected my property rights. There's a difference." Brenda looked like she wanted to hit me. Instead, she pulled out her phone and started taking pictures of the chain, muttering about evidence and lawsuits. I let her. I had nothing to hide. Over the next week, the HOA filed an appeal with the Arizona Court of Appeals. Patricia wasn't worried. Appeals take months, and the trial court's findings were solid. Walsh didn't make any legal errors. They're just wasting more money. Life started returning to normal. My driveway stayed empty except for my own car. I could park in my garage. The harassment stopped. It was blissful. Then, on July 8th, things took a darker turn. I woke up at 3 in the morning to a loud crash. I jumped out of bed and looked out my window. Someone was cutting the chain. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the security camera app. 2 figures in dark clothes were using bolt cutters on the chain. I called 911. "Someone's vandalizing my property right now. I have video." The dispatcher kept me on the line while officers were dispatched. I watched on my phone as the 2 figures finished cutting the chain and then started spray painting my driveway. They tagged it with obscenities and HOA forever. 3 police cars arrived within 5 minutes. The vandals tried to run but didn't make it far. Officers tackled them in the community center parking lot. Under their hoodies were 2 people I recognized from HOA events. One was Deborah Kent, Brenda's right-hand woman on the board. The other was Deborah's husband, Frank. The officers took statements and arrested both of them. Vandalism, trespassing, destruction of property. They were taken away in handcuffs while I provided my security footage to the police. Detective Sarah Martinez caught the case. She came by the next morning to follow up. We've charged them both with criminal damage and trespassing. The video evidence is clear. This is an easy prosecution. Do you think Brenda Morrison put them up to it? That's a good question. We're going to interview them and see if they implicate anyone else. If Morrison conspired to commit this crime, she'll be charged too. Deborah and Frank apparently weren't criminal masterminds. When faced with clear video evidence and the prospect of jail time, they flipped immediately. Deborah told detectives that Brenda had been complaining for weeks about the chain, saying something needed to be done. She'd suggested that if someone were to remove it, the HOA would be grateful. She'd even provided the bolt cutters from the community center's maintenance shed. Detective Martinez called me 3 days later. We're bringing charges against Brenda Morrison for conspiracy to commit criminal damage and solicitation. She orchestrated this. Will she go to jail? That's up to the prosecutor and eventually a judge. But yes, jail time is possible, especially since this was retaliation for a lawsuit she lost. Brenda was arrested on July 12th. The local news covered it. HOA president arrested in property dispute was the headline. The story detailed our legal battle, the easement termination, and the vandalism conspiracy. It went semi-viral in HOA horror story circles online. I got emails from people sharing their own nightmare HOA experiences. The criminal case moved faster than the civil litigation had. Brenda, Deborah, and Frank were all offered plea deals. Deborah and Frank took theirs immediately. Probation, community service, restitution for the damage to my property, which came to about $3,000. For the chain, post repairs, and cleaning the graffiti. Brenda held out longer. She insisted she was innocent, that Deborah had misunderstood her, that she'd never intended for anyone to commit crimes. The prosecutor didn't buy it. With Deborah's testimony, the security footage showing Deborah and Frank using HOA tools, and the timeline of events, the case was solid. Brenda's attorney finally convinced her to take a deal in August. She pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit criminal damage. The sentence was 90 days in jail, suspended with 2 years probation, 500 hours of community service, full restitution, and resignation from the HOA board. The hearing where she entered her plea was cathartic. I attended with Patricia. Brenda stood before the judge, diminished and defeated, admitting that she'd conspired to damage my property. The judge lectured her about respecting property rights and court orders. Mrs. Morrison, you're a community leader. You should have set an example of following the law, not breaking it. Instead, you allowed your personal vendetta to escalate into criminal behavior. You're lucky you're not going to prison. Brenda mumbled something about being sorry and understanding. I doubted she meant it. After the sentencing, Patricia and I celebrated at a steakhouse downtown. You did it, she said, raising her glass. You beat the HOA, terminated the easement, and got criminal charges brought against the board president. That's pretty much the trifecta. I just wanted to park in my own garage. Well, mission accomplished. The appeal of the easement termination went nowhere. In October, the Court of Appeals issued a 1-page order affirming Judge Walsh's decision. The easement was permanently terminated. My property was mine, free and clear. The Pinewood Heights HOA underwent major changes. With Brenda forced to resign, the remaining board members elected new leadership. A reasonable woman named Grace Foster became president. She sent me a letter apologizing for everything that had happened and promising that the HOA would respect my property rights going forward. I replaced the cut chain with a sturdier one. Mike installed posts that could withstand a car impact if someone got stupid again. I also kept the security cameras running 24/7. Life settled into a peaceful routine. My driveway remained empty except for my car. The community center continued operating next door, but their parking problems were no longer my problems. They ended up leasing additional spaces from a church 2 blocks away. I ran into some former HOA members occasionally at the grocery store or around the neighborhood. Most avoided eye contact. A few actually apologized, saying they hadn't realized how bad things had gotten until the arrests made the news. I appreciated those apologies. One evening in November, I was sitting on my porch watching the sunset when Grace Foster walked over. She was in her 50s with kind eyes and a genuinely warm demeanor. Mr. Thompson? I'm Grace Foster, the new HOA president. Do you have a minute? Sure. She sat on the porch step. I wanted to apologize again in person for everything Brenda put you through. What she did was inexcusable. The whole board is embarrassed. I appreciate that. I also wanted to ask if you'd consider joining the HOA voluntarily. I know you're grandfathered out, but we'd love to have you as a member. No pressure, and obviously no parking on your property. I considered it. What would that involve? Dues are $300 a year. You'd get voting rights, access to community center programs, and a say in how things are run. Frankly, we could use someone with your backbone on the board. I'll think about it. That's all I ask. She left, and I sat thinking. A year ago, I would have said absolutely not. But with new leadership and Brenda gone, maybe things would be different. Maybe the HOA could actually serve the community instead of terrorizing it. In the end, I decided not to join. I'd fought too hard for my independence to voluntarily give it up, but I appreciated the olive branch. It showed that not everyone in the HOA was unreasonable. December brought cooler weather and the holiday season. I decorated my house with lights and a wreath on the door. My driveway, secured by its chain and posts, held only my car and occasionally my brother's truck when he visited. On Christmas Eve, I received an envelope in the mail. Inside was a check for $3,000 from Deborah and Frank Kent, the full restitution amount. There was also a handwritten note. Mr. Thompson, we are deeply sorry for what we did. There's no excuse for our behavior. We let Brenda manipulate us into doing something we knew was wrong. We hope this payment and our sincere apology can begin to make amends. We wish you peace and happiness in your home. Sincerely, Deborah and Frank Kent. I stood in my kitchen reading the note twice. It seemed genuine. People made mistakes, especially when under the influence of someone like Brenda. I decided to accept their apology and move on. The check went toward new landscaping. I'd always wanted to upgrade my front yard, and the restitution money made it possible. By January, I had new desert plants, decorative rocks, and a modern look that made the whole property shine. Brenda finished her community service in March of the following year. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she'd moved to Tucson shortly after, unable to face the embarrassment of what she'd done. The community center was renamed the Pinewood Heights Community Building, erasing her legacy from its walls. The legal bills had been steep. All told, I'd spent about $18,000 on attorney's fees, but I'd recovered $3,000 in restitution and saved myself countless future headaches. More importantly, I'd established firm boundaries and protected my property rights. That was worth every penny. Patricia and I stayed in touch. She sent me a postcard from Hawaii where she'd gone on vacation, joking that my case had paid for the trip. I didn't mind. She'd earned it. Looking back on the whole ordeal, I learned some valuable lessons. First, document everything. Those photos and videos were crucial evidence. Second, don't back down when you're in the right. Bullies like Brenda count on people giving up out of exhaustion. Third, property rights matter. The law exists to protect owners from exactly the kind of overreach the HOA attempted. I also learned that communities can change. With better leadership, the Pinewood Heights HOA transformed from a nightmare organization into something functional. Grace Foster proved that HOAs don't have to be tyrannical. They can actually serve their communities when run by reasonable people. My driveway chain stayed up. It became a symbol of the battle I'd won and a reminder of the importance of standing up for yourself. Neighbors would sometimes ask about it, and I'd tell them the story. Most were supportive. A few thought I'd been too harsh, but they weren't the ones who'd been unable to park in their own garage for months. On the one-year anniversary of the easement termination, I threw a barbecue. I invited my family, some friends, and even sent an invitation to Grace Foster and the new HOA board as a gesture of goodwill. Grace came, and we had a pleasant conversation about neighborhood improvements and upcoming events. It felt good to turn a new page. My brother Daniel arrived with his family. His kids ran around the yard while we grilled burgers and reminisced about the craziness of the previous year. "I still can't believe you went to trial," Daniel said, flipping a burger. "That took guts." "I couldn't let them steamroll me. If I'd backed down, they would have kept pushing." "True, and now you've got a legendary property rights victory story." "I'd have preferred to just park in my garage without drama, but yeah, it worked out." We ate and laughed and enjoyed the Arizona evening. The chain across my driveway glinted in the setting sun, a permanent reminder that sometimes you have to fight for what's yours. Months turned into another year. The Pinewood Heights community building continued its programs without incident. My property remained secure and peaceful. Brenda Morrison became a cautionary tale shared among HOA boards throughout Arizona as an example of how not to handle disputes. I settled into a comfortable rhythm. Work, home, the occasional weekend trip to Sedona or Flagstaff, my house was my sanctuary, finally free from the stress and harassment that had defined that difficult year. Every so often, I'd get an email or message from someone who'd heard my story, usually someone in their own HOA dispute. I'd offer advice. Document everything, know your rights, don't be afraid to lawyer up if necessary, and never let anyone push you off property you own. The chain stayed up, even though the threat was long gone. It served a new purpose now. Peace of mind. I could look at it and know that my boundaries were clear, my property was secure, and I'd stood up for myself when it mattered. Late one night in early summer, 2 years after everything had started, I sat on my porch with a beer and thought about how far things had come. The legal battle, the harassment, the arrests, all of it felt like a different lifetime. My property was quiet. My driveway was empty except for my car, right where it belonged. The HOA had become a functional organization under new leadership. I'd won not just a legal victory, but something more important, the right to live peacefully in my own home without interference. That's what property ownership is supposed to mean. That's what I'd fought for. The chain across my driveway rattled slightly in the breeze, and I smiled. Sometimes the best defense is a simple physical boundary that says clearly, "This is mine." Sometimes standing your ground, even when it's expensive and exhausting, is exactly what you need to do. And sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys win. I finished my beer, locked up the house, and went to bed in my home, on my property, secure in the knowledge that I'd done what was right. The battle with the Pinewood Heights HOA was over. I'd protected what was mine, held people accountable for their actions, and emerged stronger for it. The next morning, I woke up, pressed the garage door opener, and backed my car out of my garage and down my driveway without obstruction. It was a simple pleasure that I'd never take for granted again. The chain remained locked behind me, a silent guardian of the peace I'd fought so hard to achieve. Life went on, as it always does. But now it went on without HOA drama, without parking disputes, without harassment or violations or court dates. It went on the way it should have from the beginning, peacefully, on my property, under my control. And that, finally, was exactly how it was supposed to be.